I covered $8,100 toward my parents' 40th anniversary dinner. It included the ballroom, the string quartet, and the open bar. A week before, my brother Miles said, "We need to keep this for close family only." My mom texted 4 words, "Don't make a fuss." So I canceled the ballroom. On the day, my dad left 41 voicemails. When I finally answered, I said, "But that came later. For years, my name was Hayden and I was the solution. I was 33, financially stable, and professionally competent. I didn't just handle my own life, I managed theirs. I was the one who called the plumber, set up the automatic bill, pay for the property taxes, and remembered to schedule the preventative maintenance on the furnace. I was the daughter who showed up early to help, stayed late to clean up, and lent money I knew I wouldn't see again. I performed these duties so automatically that my effort stopped registering as effort at all. It was just background noise, like the quiet hum of the refrigerator or the air they breathed. It was expected. Meanwhile, there was Miles. He was the perpetual disaster, the one who constantly needed saving. Miles had 2 kids with a woman he knew was cheating on him. His job history was less of a career path and more a series of dramatic financial implosions. He had an actual talent for finding the worst way to leverage bad debt, from microloans to payday lenders. Credit cards were maxed out within weeks of being issued. He was the one who crashed cars, missed payments, and triggered the crisis that always demanded my parents' immediate attention. Yet, to them, Miles was a tragic hero. He was charming, of course, and always had a story for why things went wrong. "He just needs a little help right now," they would always say. Their voices thick with concern, their emotional investment clear. While they were busy worrying about Miles, I was quietly covering the unexpected bills and arranging house repairs. I was the fixer, the reliable safety net they could rely on without ever having to acknowledge or thank. I realized early that in my family, reliability was a curse. I was the steady foundation, but drama was the only currency they valued. The only person who ever looked at the dynamic and stated the obvious was my boyfriend, Graham Holt. I had driven across town, leaving dinner early, to pick up my father from a mechanic, because Miles had forgotten he was supposed to do it. The memory still stung. Later that night, as I was recounting the event, trying to laugh it off, Graham told me, "They don't treat you like a daughter. They treat you like a solution." I laughed again, right then, harder than I should have. It was easier than admitting how perfectly accurate his observation was. He was calm, leaning against the kitchen counter, with his arms crossed, watching me with quiet, steady eyes. He didn't say it to be cruel or to start a fight. He said it because he loved me and watched me constantly pour effort into a well that never gave back. He was the first person to articulate the core of my internal conflict. I was trying to earn love through my usefulness, and they were happy to accept the services without ever delivering the love. This dynamic, this endless search for validation through sacrifice, led me directly into planning the anniversary party. I desperately wanted one perfect, undeniable moment where they would look at me and feel only pride. That's why I emptied my savings for a night that would cost $8,100. I wanted to be the reason for their celebration and their entire perfect world. But I was about to learn that no amount of money or effort could buy something they had already decided I wasn't allowed to have. The resentment, already a heavy, familiar cloak, was about to become the armor I needed. My life as the solution was about to end, replaced by something much colder and much more free. Graham's observation about being treated like a solution had landed with the subtle, deep pain of absolute truth. Instead of confronting the truth, I focused on the tangible, the anniversary. I was determined to prove him wrong. Or perhaps, to prove that if the solution was grand enough, the love would finally follow. The party was scheduled for 2 weeks out. I was immersed in the final planning stages, the kind of detail work I actually enjoyed. This wasn't fixing a broken pipe. This was crafting a flawless experience. I wanted them to walk into that room and feel overwhelmingly celebrated, respected, and surrounded by admiration. I wanted them to realize that I was the one who could deliver that kind of spectacle. I had booked a stunning ballroom in the city. The kind of venue with high ceilings, chandeliers that actually sparkled, and polished hardwood that reflected the lights. I contracted a string quartet, not just for background music, but for a full hour of cocktail performance. The caterer was renowned, offering a menu that was rich and unforgettable, complemented by an open bar stocked with my dad's preferred single malt whiskey. The cake was a 3-tier masterpiece, ordered from a bakery booked months in advance. The final cost estimate, excluding my time and endless mental labor, had reached $8,100. Graham and I had made silent compromises to pay for it. Our planned summer vacation was canceled. We ate simpler meals and put off a necessary repair on our own car. But I didn't regret it. Every cent was an investment in the respect I had always chased. In my mind, this night was the ultimate declaration of my devotion. A sacrifice so visible it couldn't be ignored. I was mentally finalizing the seating chart when my phone buzzed with Miles's name. The second his name lit up the screen, my stomach tightened into a knot. Miles never called unless he needed something, or, more often, had created a crisis I would inevitably have to clean up. This time, I assumed it was a demand for cash. It was worse. "Hey, Hayden," he started, his tone oily and falsely reasonable. The one he used when he was about to make an outrageous request sound like common sense. "Listen, about the anniversary." I gripped the phone tightly. "What about it, Miles? Everything is set. Don't tell me you forgot to get them a card." No, nothing like that." He chuckled, a sound that always grated on my nerves. "It's just, Mom and Dad were talking. With everything going on, with their stress, they really think it should just be close family only." I blinked, processing the implication. "What do you mean, a close family only? I've invited 80 people. The deposit is non-refundable. The catering is paid for. Too many people makes it complicated." He insisted, his voice hardening slightly, as if I were the one being difficult. "Look, just keep it tight. Us, you, the kids, Mom and Dad. That's it. No lifelong friends. No cousins who have flown in, no neighbors. No audience. Just a little bubble." I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't about simplifying things. This was about removing the witnesses. It was about denying them the public spectacle I had worked so hard to create. It was about denying is me. the public recognition for my effort. I realized instantly that whatever stress they were under, and it was almost certainly due to one of his financial escapades, they needed to prevent outsiders from seeing it. The truth was ugly, and my grand celebration was too bright a spotlight. Before I could even launch into a tirade about the thousands of dollars I had already spent, a new notification flashed across the top of my screen. A text from my mom. 4 words, cold and final, confirming his directive. Don't make a fuss. That was the moment the years of resentment, the cumulative weight of every slight, every unthanked effort, and every excused disaster involving Miles, crystallized. It wasn't a sudden snap or an outburst of rage. It was quiet, solid, and final. It felt like a heavy lock, clicking into place. For years, I had believed that if I poured enough effort into the family, I could earn their love. Now, standing there, staring at those 4 words, I realized the effort itself was irrelevant. They didn't want the party. They wanted obedience and discretion. They didn't want the spectacle. They wanted the problem to go away quietly. The whole elaborate gesture I had built was deemed a fuss. I looked down at the text again. Don't make a fuss. The perfect opportunity for true, cold revenge had just landed in my lap. I didn't have to fight them. I just had to obey their instruction to the letter. If they wanted close family only, that is exactly what they would get. I took a deep breath, picking up my phone. I didn't tell Miles what the cancellation would cost. I didn't mention the 3-tier cake or the non-refundable deposit. I simply replied to his message with 1 word. Okay. The cold, hard resolve was set. I knew what I had to do next, and it filled me with a strange sense of anticipation. Like finally making a decision after months of indecision. The calls had to be made immediately. I set my phone down. The sound of the plastic hitting the wooden table, surprisingly loud in the quiet kitchen. The moment I typed, okay, to Miles. I had moved past resentment and into implementation. My plan was simple literal obedience. They asked for close family only, and they endorsed the removal of the fuss. I was going to provide exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less, and certainly nothing special. I pulled out the list of vendors, the meticulously organized spreadsheet I had been curating for months. I started dialing. The ballroom manager was first. They sounded surprised when I requested cancellation for the following weekend. I confirmed that yes, I understood the deposit was non-refundable. It was a sunk cost, a small price for the profound sense of control I felt taking hold. Next was the caterer. I explained that due to a sudden change in family plans, the large party was off. They had already ordered specialized ingredients and were frustrated, but professional. I apologized politely, feeling nothing. I moved on to the string quartet, then the florist, then the bakery that was meant to produce the 3-tier masterpiece. One by one, I severed every expensive, elaborate, public thread of the event. I didn't argue. I didn't mention the thousands of dollars down the drain. I didn't replace the canceled services with anything smaller, cheaper, or more intimate. There would be no replacement dinner. No simple celebration. There would just be the anniversary day, stripped bare. Exactly what Miles had asked for, and what my mother had tacitly demanded. Graham watched me from across the kitchen island. He had been quietly reading a book, but his eyes tracked me as I spoke to the vendors. His arms were crossed over his chest. His expression unreadable. No judgment, no pity, no encouragement. Just observation. He knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't just throwing away money. I was finally throwing away the hope attached to it. When I finished the last call, hanging up with the wine distributor who was supplying the open bar, I dropped the phone onto the counter. I felt lighter, not happy, not triumphant, but undeniably light. The immense, years-long pressure to perform and be appreciated had finally broken. Graham pushed off the counter and walked slowly toward me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I regretted the cost. He looked directly into my eyes and said, quietly, "They're going to blame you, Hayden." I met his gaze steadily. "I know. And you're okay with that?" he pressed. I looked down at the stream of cancellation, confirmation emails flooding into my inbox. The electronic paper trail of the grand, $8,100 dream dissolving. A feeling I hadn't realized I was missing settled over me, profound and clean. "Better than okay," I replied. "For once, I'm not trying to be understood. I'm just done trying to fix what they broke." I knew they would blame me. They had to. Blaming me was their default setting. The mechanism they used to protect Miles and to avoid facing their own enablement. But for the first time, their blame held no power over me. Because I wasn't doing this for them, I was doing it for myself. I was finally standing on my own side. That sense of detached anticipation stayed with me all week, a coiled spring in my chest. I didn't call my parents. I didn't hint at the cancellations. I didn't want them to have time to fix it, or to use me to fix it. I wanted them to find out in real time. When the grand, highly anticipated day arrived, and there was nothing but silence. I was waiting for the first domino to fall in a line I had been setting up my whole life. The anniversary was just days away. The morning of the anniversary arrived, bathed in the usual golden light of a calm suburban Saturday. There was a profound stillness in my life that morning. No panic, no hurried checklist. No last-minute calls to confirm centerpiece deliveries or to direct the parking for the string quartet. There was nothing to manage. The meticulous structure of the celebration, and with it, the pressure to be the perfect daughter, had been disassembled a week ago. I felt oddly serene, the kind of calm you feel before a storm you know is going to hit somewhere else. Instead of rushing, I made coffee, measured out the dog food for our Labrador, and settled at the kitchen table. The silence of the house felt like a physical relief, like taking off a heavy, tight coat. Graham joined me, quietly flipping through the news headlines on his tablet. He didn't ask how I was feeling about the imminent explosion. He didn't need to. He'd watched the years of slow burn, the way my efforts had been silently siphoned off to stabilize Miles's latest disaster, leaving me emotionally bankrupt. He just sat beside me, present and supportive, without needing to dissect the moment. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow, deliberate crawl toward the inevitable discovery. I watched the sunlight creep across the polished kitchen floor, willing the clock forward. At 9:02 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. I recognized her ringtone instantly. Now, it only triggered anticipation. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, then it fell silent. 5 minutes later, the screen lit up with Dad's name. Same treatment. He was usually the quieter one, the delegator, but his calls always carried the weight of expectation. That call was allowed to run its course too, a little spark hitting the water and being extinguished. Then Miles. Of course, Miles. He was probably calling to confirm the time the limo was picking up our parents, still operating under the happy delusion that everything I had planned was proceeding perfectly on his behalf. I silenced his call before the first ring finished. The voicemails began to accumulate. At first, they were light, airy, and entirely unsuspecting. Mom's first message was cheerful. She was wondering if I was already at the ballroom, arranging the seating charts. And she reminded me to tell the caterer that Dad preferred the salmon to the beef, even though I knew the beef was what they had actually ordered. They were still expecting music, drinks, speeches, and a room full of admiring witnesses. Dad's initial message was similarly casual. He asked if I needed him to bring anything, adding that he was looking forward to seeing the quartet. He sounded relaxed, confident in the knowledge that I had the entire spectacle under control. Miles left a brief message asking, in his usual entitled tone, what time the limo was picking up everyone. Their collective assumption that a glamorous party was waiting for them, an event they had effectively cancelled by proxy, was almost comical. The next wave of calls, however, signaled the shift. The panic was starting to break through the facade of celebration. At 10:30 in the morning, the tone changed sharply. A text from Mom arrived. The bakery isn't answering. Are you there? Then a voicemail from Dad, heavy with confusion. Hayden. The venue's main line said our booking was released. What is going on? Another text from Miles, slightly hysterical. Why are cousins saying they didn't get invites? Is there a mistake? Did you forget to send them? He was worried about his audience, not his parents' happiness. I sat there, drinking my second cup of coffee, feeling the rush of messages like tiny bullets hitting thick glass. I didn't respond. I kept watching the sunlight crawl across the floor, acutely aware of how slow time moved when you were waiting for reality to strike. By 11:40, 5 in the morning, the messages turned sharp and accusatory. Dad's voice was tight with anger in the next voicemail. Where are you? The caterer says they have no order. The quartet says they were told not to come. Hayden, what did you do? He used my full name, always a sign that the politeness had evaporated. By noon, it became ridiculous. The missed calls and voicemails were coming in like machine gun fire. 41 voicemails, 27 missed calls. Texts from all three of them were flooding the screen, demanding explanations, demanding answers, demanding that I fix this. Graham glanced at the phone screen, which was cycling between their three names. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You still okay? I nodded, feeling a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. Better than okay, I murmured. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang again. Dad. I didn't let it ring out. I answered. Before I could even speak, his voice exploded through the speaker, distorted by rage and static. Why was the ballroom cancelled? Why is the open bar gone? Why is the florist saying the order was withdrawn? Hayden, what did you do? I didn't yell back. I didn't soften my voice. I spoke flatly, letting the calm simplicity of the truth land with maximum impact. You told me close family only, I said. That's exactly what you're getting. There was a long, deep, shocking pause on the other end. The kind of silence that usually preceded a major shift in the atmosphere. I could almost hear his mind, trying to process the literal interpretation of his own command. Then, the sputtering rage began. He launched into how this was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime event, how I had humiliated them, how people would ask questions, and how I had ruined their big day. He was angry not about the loss of the party, but about the loss of their image. I stared out the window at our quiet street, feeling the resolve settle deeper inside me. You made it clear what you wanted, I repeated, my voice steady. And I did exactly what you asked. Nothing more, nothing less. He sputtered something about me being ungrateful and hung up. Slamming the phone down hard enough that I heard the sound echo through the connection. I barely had time to set my phone down before I heard the immediate, aggressive rumble of their car engine approaching. I looked up to see their large sedan, turning onto our street, moving fast. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to collect a debt. Part 5, the confrontation, was about to begin. The sound of their seat-in tires, crunching aggressively over our gravel driveway, was the definitive end of the quiet phase. The car skidded slightly to a stop at the curb. Doors flew open simultaneously. They didn't arrive like people seeking an explanation. They arrived like an angry mob, demanding retribution for a betrayal. My father was already pointing toward the porch. Before he was fully out of the car, directing the approach like a raid. My mother followed. Her face a mask of furious indignation, her phone still clutched in her hand as if she had been mid-text, presumably detailing my treachery to someone. Miles emerged last, wearing his habitual look of superiority. That smug, tight expression he reserved for moments when he knew the system, and his parents, were on his side. My mother didn't use the doorbell. She slammed her fist against the solid wood door 3 times, a sharp, violent series of raps that rattled the frame. When I opened it, the afternoon heat rushed in, mixing with the hotter, heavier atmosphere of their rage. I stood framed in the doorway, blocking the entrance. I made no move to step aside, no invitation to enter, no pretense of hospitality. My mother launched immediately, her voice high, pitched and laced with hysteria. How could you humiliate us like this, Hayden? What were we supposed to tell people? Do you have any idea how disgusting this is? My father's voice came right behind hers, loud and weighted with false authority. This isn't about you, Hayden. This is about family. This was supposed to be our day. Miles stood slightly behind them, arms folded across his chest, the silent, watching jury. He let them deliver the initial blows, acting like the prince overseeing his guards, punishing a disobedient servant. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. They were lecturing me about family and obedience on the exact spot where I had just realized how little they valued me. You got exactly what you asked for, I said, my voice steady and unnervingly calm, cutting through their rising volume. I didn't raise my voice to meet theirs. I let the simplicity of my statement stand on its own. Close family only. The fuss was cancelled. My mother snapped, her face tightening with disbelief. That was never meant literally! It was a figure of speech. It was understood. My father insisted, stepping forward slightly. You were still supposed to make it a special. You were supposed to find a way to make it work. Miles finally spoke, dropping his cutting judgment like a legal verdict. He never yelled, he just condemned. A real daughter would have found a way to make it work. That sentence, spoken by him, Miles, the walking debt machine who had consumed every resource I had ever generated for this family, made me laugh. It was a sharp, unplanned sound, devoid of humor, born purely out of the absurdity of his entitlement. This was the man who had watched me cover house repairs, medical bills, and every family emergency, while he created new crises and called it living. And he had the audacity to define real daughter for me. Before I could reply, Graham stepped into the doorway right beside me. He hadn't said a word, but he had been listening to every accusation, every demand, and every lie. He didn't come out swinging, he came out silent, his presence a sudden, massive weight in the confrontation. Something in Miles's judgment must have flipped a switch in him, moving him past observer to protector. Graham didn't yell. He didn't swear. He spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a judge reading a sentence. His eyes were locked on my parents, ignoring Miles entirely. "You want to talk about real?" Graham asked. His voice was low and steady, forcing them to strain to hear him, effectively seizing control of the volume dynamics. Real is watching Hayden sacrifice year after year while you praise Miles for doing nothing. Real is watching her show up for you, while you treat her like a tool you pull out when you need a solution. My mother's face twisted, ready to interrupt with a defensive outburst, but Graham's intensity cut her off. Real is watching you ignore her life, her compromises, and then demand she throw you an $8,000 ballroom party, just to prove she loves you. He continued, his tone unwavering. You've taken her money, her time, and her peace, and you've never once acted like it mattered. You're not angry because she ruined an anniversary. You're angry because for the very first time, she didn't clean up your mess. Miles's smug expression faltered. The sudden, factual barrage from an outsider, someone they couldn't dismiss as an emotional relative, hit them squarely. All three of them stood frozen on the porch, their outrage momentarily suspended by shock. Then Graham finished, his voice returning to that quiet, final tone. You can leave now. He didn't move. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, a human wall, giving them no room to negotiate. No opening for a counter-argument. He simply waited. My parents looked at each other, then at the unwavering solidarity of our posture. Their energy, fueled by the certainty of my inevitable compliance, had nowhere to go. My father swallowed, his shoulders slumping slightly. Without another word, my parents turned and walked back to the car. Miles, trailing behind them, shot me one last look, not of triumph, but of momentary confusion, before climbing into the back seat. The sound of the car doors slamming shut was final and absolute. The engine roared to life, and the sedan backed out of the driveway, disappearing down the street. It felt like the cleanest, deepest breath I had taken in years. Graham turned and looked at me. He didn't need to ask if I was okay this time. The validation he had provided was more effective than any therapy. Thank you, I murmured, the word feeling too small for the relief I felt. Anytime, he replied, touching my arm lightly. The physical confrontation was over, but I knew the emotional war wasn't. They would regroup. They would certainly blame me for the embarrassment, the cost, and the lack of a spectacular image. They would spin the narrative to paint me as the villain. I braced myself for the silence, the Cold War that usually followed such an explosion. I assumed they would retreat, lick their wounds, and decide how to privately condemn me. But the next morning, I learned I had been wrong about their next move. They weren't done trying to pull me back into the role of the solution. The silence didn't come. Instead, they came back, bringing a new layer of manufactured guilt with them. I expected silence after the furious exit, a period of icy, calculated distance where they would privately frame me as the ungrateful monster. That was the usual family dynamic, a big explosion, followed by weeks of Cold War. Instead, at 10:15 a.m., the very next morning, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. My stomach tightened instantly. I peeked through the front window. It was my parents' sedan parked at the curb again, but something was immediately different. Miles wasn't with them. In our family, Miles was always attached to their hip during conflict, serving as their emotional legal counsel, ready to paint me as difficult or volatile. His absence alone was enough to raise my pulse. I opened the door, but just as before, I didn't step aside. I stood firm in the frame, communicating clearly that I was not hosting a reconciliation. My mother started talking immediately, her voice quick, soft, and slightly rehearsed, as if she were afraid I would shut the door if she paused too long. "We've been thinking about things. Hayden," she began, the anger from yesterday completely replaced by a forced, fragile sincerity. "We just want you to understand our side. We know we shouldn't have come at you so hard yesterday." My dad stood beside her, hands shoved deep into his pockets, nodding along like a man waiting for a cue in court. His shoulders seemed slightly slumped, a subtle visual plea for sympathy. The story unfolded. It wasn't just stress. Miles wasn't doing well. Not a rough patch, but actually struggling. They mentioned money stress, anxiety, and some loans. They didn't want to explain the details. That was still considered too private. But according to them, that was the real, heartbreaking reason the anniversary had to be small. They didn't want people asking questions if Miles looked stressed or if he wasn't able to afford a gift. Then my mom pivoted, smoothly changing the narrative to manufactured sentimentality. "But even with all that," she said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic register, "it still would have been nice to see everyone together. Family matters, Hayden." I almost laughed again. If family mattered, they wouldn't have spent the last 20 years showing me exactly where I ranked. Always second to his drama. Always the tool for their convenience. Before I could respond to the sentiment, my father's eyes drifted past me, focusing on something across the street. "Whose car is that?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp, his focus broken. I followed his gaze. 3 houses down, a dark sedan was angled just enough for the driver to have a clear line of sight to my front porch. The engine was idling. The driver wore sunglasses and was pretending to scroll through a phone. I recognized the car immediately. Kendra Shaw, Miles's long-time girlfriend. In that instant, everything clicked into place. She wasn't lost. She wasn't waiting for a friend. She was watching, relaying information, confirming the contents of this supposed family heart-to-heart. Miles hadn't come, but he had sent an ear. I turned back to my parents, cutting through their carefully constructed narrative. "Miles sent her," I said flatly. My mother flinched visibly. My dad's jaw tightened, betraying his awareness of the deception. "That's ridiculous," my mom said, too quickly and with too much volume. "Then tell her to leave," I replied. Silence. They shifted their weight, avoiding my eyes. They couldn't, or wouldn't, tell her to leave. I crossed my arms. Miles's debt isn't my responsibility. But if it's such a burden on you that you have to crash my anniversary and then send a spy, I'll pay it directly. Every cent of it. I'll clear the debt so the worry is gone. But I am not spending one more dollar pretending our family is perfect for the neighbors. The immediate, defensive reaction was telling. "Oh, no, no," my mom insisted, waving a hand. "We've got that under control. This isn't about money." "Then why are you here?" I asked. My dad cut in, his voice taking on a familiar, slightly desperate plea. "It's about meaning, Hayden. It's about showing people we're still strong. It's about reputation." There it was. I said quietly, the word tasting like ash. Image, audience, reputation. I'm done funding illusions. I stepped slightly forward, closing the space, and lowering my voice. "The conversation's over." As they reluctantly turned to walk down the steps, my dad paused and looked back once more at Kendra's car. She immediately put her phone down and started to pull away, quickly melting into traffic, as if she'd been caught somewhere she shouldn't be. The knowledge that they were willing to deploy surveillance, to continue their cycle of manipulation, only hardened my resolve. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted an accomplice. I closed the door against the heat and leaned against it, waiting for their next inevitable move. I knew this was far from finished, but I had made my final offer, and they had rejected the truth in favor of the lie. The final break was coming. My father's words echoed in my mind. "I'm done funding illusions." My father's words echoed in my mind. "I'm done funding illusions." They had refused my offer to clear Miles's debt, proving that the debt was less important than the narrative they needed to maintain. The softness in their voices vanished immediately, replaced by cold anger the second I refused to fund their illusion. "This family has always taken care of each other," my dad said, his voice flat and severe. "And if you can't be a part of that when we need you, maybe you shouldn't be part of it at all." He was delivering the ultimatum, the sentence I had secretly feared for years, the final exclusion. I had always imagined that moment would be devastating, leaving me gutted and alone. Instead, realizing how much emotional currency that sentence had cost me over the years, how much I had sacrificed just to avoid hearing it, I felt an unexpected, serene wash of calm. It felt like permission. "I agree," I said simply. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide, convinced she had misheard the word that would define our relationship going forward. I repeated it, clearly and without venom. I said, "I agree." There was nothing left to argue about. They had demanded participation in their dysfunction. I had chosen peace. They turned and walked back to their car. My mom shut the door with a dramatic, unnecessary slam. The engine revved, and they drove off without looking back, leaving a silence that felt heavy with finality. By that evening, the story had already started spreading. Miles was quick to spin the narrative, launching a full-scale campaign against me. According to the version circulating among the extended family, I had stolen the $8,100 intended for the anniversary and cancelled the event out of spite and jealousy. He claimed I was unstable and humiliated them intentionally because I couldn't stand being in his shadow. I almost laughed. There had never been a spotlight for me to share. There was only a basement where I was expected to work. 2 days later, my cousin Elise called. Elise never inserted herself into family drama, going so far as to skip holidays just to avoid Miles. Her voice, usually light, was tight with distress. "Hayden," she said, "you need to know what Miles is saying about you. It's bad. He's making you sound like a monster." I told her I already knew. But while Miles was busy painting me as the villain, reality was already tearing his perfectly constructed image apart faster than I ever could. The first crack came from the debt itself. The private loan my parents refused to explain wasn't from a traditional bank, or even a reputable online lender. It was from a man who dealt exclusively in cash, intimidation, and high interest rates. When Miles missed several payments, the lender didn't send an email, he showed up. He arrived in broad daylight at my parents' house, pounding on the front door so loudly that windows rattled. He shouted about money owed, his voice carrying far down the quiet, respectable suburban street. Neighbors came out to stare. One person across the street pulled out their phone. Another neighbor, an older woman who had always praised my parents' flawless stability, actually called the police. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone, but not before making it crystal clear that he would return. Within hours, the neighborhood knew, the very people whose opinion was everything to my parents suddenly had a new topic of discussion. The perfect image of stability that I had been expected to pay for and maintain had been shattered not by my revenge, but by Miles's consequences. The second hit landed hard, confirming the chaos surrounding the golden child. Kendra, the same girlfriend Miles had sent to spy on me, was caught cheating. It wasn't a rumor. She was caught in a car in a parking lot by one of my parents' oldest friends. That friend immediately told someone else, and that someone else told everyone. Within 48 hours, the story had spread like wildfire through the extended family, neighbors, and even my dad's tight-knit country club circle. Years of meticulous image management collapsed in one weekend, and I hadn't lifted a finger. For the first time, I wasn't cleaning up after Miles. I was watching the mess finally reach the people who had protected him, forcing them to face the ugly truth that they had so desperately tried to hide behind my cancelled party. I knew they would be back. Not to apologize, of course, but to ask me to fix the new, larger mess. They returned exactly when I knew they would. A few days after Elise's call, after the gossip had reached its peak. They arrived not loud and angry, but careful and desperate, their car rolling up to the curb slow and deliberate. Like they were approaching a negotiation table they had no leverage over. The final painful conversation was about to begin. The final, definitive encounter with my parents had left a quiet vacancy in the air, a space that felt strangely incomplete. I had chosen to agree to their ultimatum. That if I couldn't be part of the solution, I shouldn't be part of the family at all. The silence that followed was not the Cold War I expected, but a genuine absence of demand. 2 days after that confrontation, I was sitting alone in the living room when I heard a tentative knock on the front door. It wasn't the aggressive slam of my mother, but a hesitant, low rap. I opened the door to find Miles. Alone. I barely recognized him. Without the armor of his parents standing beside him, and without the support of his carefully maintained facade, he looked smaller, younger, and utterly defeated. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by a kind of panicked exhaustion. He didn't try to step inside. He didn't apologize for the smear campaign he had launched against me. He didn't mention the anniversary, the debt, or the public humiliation. He just looked at me with raw, desperate eyes and spoke the words that confirmed his own personal collapse. "Hayden," he said, his voice quiet and thin. "They won't talk to me. They aren't answering my calls, Hayden. Please, can you talk to them?" I looked at my brother, the man whose protection had been the singular, defining focus of my parents' lives, and who was now locked out of their system of support. The golden child, finally alone in the dark. I shook my head, my voice firm and clear. "I can't help you, Miles." He stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, like a man deciding whether to break down and beg, or unleash a final burst of anger. He chose neither. He simply turned and walked away. The engine of his borrowed car didn't start with the usual authoritative roar. It coughed twice before sputtering to life. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. It was clearly my father. "You've made your point. Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It was a concession. A bitter acknowledgement that the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. They were asking me to admit to vindictiveness, to admit to having won, so they could finally close the book on their own humiliation. I didn't reply. I set the phone down. Yes, I was happy. For the first time in my adult life, I truly was. 3 weeks passed after that message. There were no more calls, no surprise visits, and no dramatic social media posts. Just silence. At first, the quiet felt unnatural. Like the deep calm after a devastating hurricane, when you're still bracing for the next hit. I expected the shoe to drop. Another relative trying to mediate. Another guilt-soaked voicemail. Miles showing up again with a new angle of attack. But none of it came. The separation was absolute. Slowly, subtly, I realized the profound effect the silence was having on my life. My muscles, which had perpetually been tight with anticipation, finally started to relax. Graham noticed it before I did. "You're sleeping better," he said one morning as we drank coffee on the porch. A Sunday morning that was simply peaceful, not pregnant with impending drama. "You don't jump when your phone buzzes anymore." I hadn't realized how tightly wounded I had been until that moment. I had internalized their needs and their chaos so deeply that their absence had left a wound that healed into peace. We talked about the fallout sometimes, but we didn't dissect it. The truth had arrived and burned clean everything that needed to be exposed. Through Elise, I heard fragments of their new reality. My parents were still living in the small apartment they had rented briefly while their house was being repaired. A repair I had organized and paid for. Dad's disability checks barely covered the rent and utilities. Mom had started working extra, demanding hours where she could find them. Miles had finally lost his car when the lender repossessed it, and Kendra was gone for good. The once golden circle had shrunk to just the three of them, isolated, with no one left to blame but each other. The absence of demand was the greatest form of power I had ever known. I ran into my parents once, randomly, at the grocery store. It wasn't dramatic. They stood a few aisles away, huddled near the canned soup, pretending to be deeply absorbed in the labels. When our eyes inevitably met, my mom offered a tight, polite smile. The kind you give a stranger in a waiting room. My dad nodded, stiff and careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing and triggering another consequence. They didn't approach me. They didn't accuse me. They didn't ask for a single thing. They averted their gaze and quickly moved down the opposite aisle. That told me everything. Power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it's just the clean, chilling absence of demand. Later that week, a mutual friend messaged me, asking how I was holding up after the family explosion. I thought about softening the story, making it more palatable for someone uncomfortable with accountability. I chose not to. I'm good, I typed back. Actually good. And I meant it. I stopped volunteering explanations for my absence at family events. I stopped softening the story. If someone asked, I told the simple, non-venomous truth. I set a boundary. They didn't like it. That was enough. My son adjusted faster than I expected. He was only 8, and children have a way of accepting reality when it's presented honestly. He missed his cousins, but he didn't miss the tension that had always hummed beneath the surface of family gatherings. Our house felt quieter. Laughter came easier, less strained. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked the question I had been preparing for. "Mom, are we in trouble with Grandma and Grandpa?" I knelt in front of him and kissed his forehead. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are safe. Sometimes adults make choices that mean they can't be in our lives the way they should be. That's not your fault, and it has nothing to do with you." He nodded, rolling over, satisfied with the honest answer. That's when the final realization hit me. Breaking the cycle looked quiet. It looked like choosing not to explain myself to people who only heard what benefited them. It looked like refusing to clean up messes I hadn't made. It looked like letting the golden child finally live without the spotlight and seeing what happened when the lights went out. I hadn't won. They hadn't necessarily lost. Reality had simply arrived for everyone, and for once, I wasn't the one holding the broom while everyone else made the mess. That wasn't revenge. That was freedom.